would one want to understand
The nature of reality.
Well, to
Understand.
truth? Yeah, but with metaphysics, how could one come to comprehend?
Empirical observation is a facade contrived by.
Similar to that whole cinematic introduction you had just viewed, reality can be very confusing, especially when you have no real limits on what you're talking about. Now that's where metaphysics comes in. Metaphysics is one of the big branches of philosophy that seeks to sort of outline the fundamentals of what reality is. Now, the specific parts of reality that are often discussed within metaphysical conversations include the mind, the material world, values, language, existence itself, and all these other, things. Now, what we're going to be focusing on is the debate of perception, specifically how the material world actually is, whether or not the world is mind-dependent or mind-independent. So pretty much that pencil that's either in your hand, on your desk, in your bag, wherever it is that really the pencil that you are seeing, or is there something more to it? So we'll find out in a bit. All right, so what is this debate? What exactly are the positions and why are we even having this debate? In this corner over here, we have idealists, intentionalists, people that think that reality is mind-dependent. And then in the other corner, right over here, we have the naive realists, the materialists, people that think that reality is simply as is. It is independent of the mind. And you could easily discern between something like a hallucination and, a veritable experience, a real sort of happening, right? Now, as these guys duke it out in my mind, we're gonna actually, we're gonna provide some commentary. The left hook, right? Ooh, we got the right jab. This is a kickboxing match, so we even got the side kick or something to the thigh. Anyway, when I say that reality is mind dependent, an idealist wouldn't necessarily say that everything is contrived or conjured up by the mind. No. That's not necessarily what that means. It just means that because so many different things in reality are perceptual, and because there's so many different components to reality, it's a little hard to discern, a real experience from something like a hallucination or illusion. Pretty much saying that we may never really truly ascertain what reality is. Now, naive realists and materialists, on the other hand, they believe, no, you can easily distinguish between, various different experiences, and there's no such thing as an infinite component to something, and everything could be measured and all of this, blah, 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 right? There's no unexplainables. We simply have not discovered a way to explain something yet. We're pretty much big empirical reasoning nerds, all right? That's what they are. But yeah, that's like the big thing. Pretty much mind dependence in the sense that things are perceptual. Mind independence is that, yes, things are technically perceptual, but we could easily discern between some sort of, real and fake thing. Now, the common ground, let's establish that real quick before we quickly just jump over everything, right? The common ground is that, yes, there is this thing, the material world, there's this thing, the mind. Perceptions are real, right? Finite components, they definitely exist. Things are transient, things are temporal, things are ephemeral, short-lasting, whatever you want to say, right? That is real, right? There is this finite existence here, and there's finite components to things that could be measured and, completely limited and stuff in terms of like you could actually enumerate the abundance of something, right? So that's the common ground. Now, where things get really complicated is on the fundamental disagreements. Now, the fundamental disagreements being the existence of infinite components and the fact that reality is perceptual, but to the extent, right, that you cannot even discern between an illusion or hallucination, right? And that's another thing with common ground. Illusions, hallucinations, and veritable experiences / real experiences are real. That's a common ground. But whether or not, you could discern between all of them, that's something up for debate. And that's where things get really complicated when it comes to dialecticals and such, aka logic. Let's sort of explain now, why exactly would you want, why should you care? Why should you care if these nerds and these schizophrenics argue, all right? Who cares, right? Well, this whole argument is what bred modern empiricism and modern science and observation. Like this whole, because metaphysics has been a thing since classical antiquity, Greece, maybe even beforehand in places like Egypt and such, right? So yeah, but like this has been a thing for a long time. We've been discussing this, and when it comes to contemporary stuff, it's really important when it comes to sort of believing in like empirical reasoning and sort of knowing the extent to how far we could go when it comes to measuring certain things, especially when it comes to the mind. Like you can see in modern day, a lot of people debate about things like intelligence and creativity and whether or not those things could truly be measured due to how multifaceted they are, right? So yeah, that's sort of the explanation of the information here. Hey, don't even try to leave, all right? We still have to talk about some absolutely schizo stuff. But of course, it's gonna be beneficial to your understanding and stuff. We're gonna be talking about Eleatic monism and panentheism, as well as define the term simple apprehension. Now, all of these things kind of exist outside of the whole debate. Not necessarily outside of in the sense that they are completely separate, but sort of, it's just a grander sort of scheme. It's that top layer to an extent, if you want to think about it like that. Eleatic monism is the whole belief that all is one. Now, it sounds absolutely absurd when you look at, literally anything around you, but it's the whole belief that everything is made up of one matter. It cannot be separated in any sort of way, and it sort of alludes to the idea that if anything is perceptual, that means everything is perceptual, including ourselves, and thus we are the same as any other object, which again sounds a little absurd, but it gives you a little bit of perspective regarding this whole debate. Panentheism is the whole belief that God and the universe exist as one thing. Now, that could be a little tricky when it comes to interpreting what that means. Does that mean that this whole sort of confluence is sort of saying that God and the universe are one, or that they kind of just sprouted and burgeoned up together? Who knows, right? That's kind of where there's a little bit of schism even in different papers and stuff, right? Now, simple apprehension is a term that sort of describes acknowledging an object or idea simply as is, but not in the sense that you are confirming or denying anything. You're just sort of being like, okay, I see that this exists as an idea, and you kind of leave it at that. And the reason why I mention this term is because you'd sort of think that it would be mentioned in something like this, because you're sort of allowing for modalities and stuff to occur where you sort of are like, okay, there's so many different possibilities of what this is. But of course, you also may not be doing something like that, because when you think about modality in philosophy, you think of all the different possibilities, and you would sort of have to believe that it exists to an extent and stuff. And so, that's where things get a little complicated. So simple apprehension isn't really that simple. Understanding all of this is kind of important, actually, to understanding sort of the whole debate, because it sort of begs the question, why even debate such a thing? Because, it seems like we're such infinitesimal beings compared to this whole grand universe, Why not continue questioning that instead? Well, that's the thing, is that, all these larger sort of questions have influenced, the whole debate regarding the material world and the mind and the interactions between that, all, within all that stuff. Idealism is simply better, I'm simply correct and your intuitions are wrong. Now, why I say that is because, yes, sure, on the surface level, it would make sense. We have to be able to measure things. Objects have to present themselves as is. It just wouldn't make sense. It would go against all common sense and stuff to say otherwise, right? But think about it. In fact, I'll appeal to the current sort of zeitgeist when it comes to what is truly veritable, that being, empirical measurements and such, when it comes to within the realm of science and everything, right? So sound and sight, that's what we'll be talking about. Sound is actually your brain's interpretation of compressed airwaves. This is something, that is kind of just a known fact, right? Now, that sort of gives credence to the whole perceptual argument due to the fact that the object in this case it would be sound, is not, it does not actually present itself as is. In reality, it is something else. It is compressed airwaves. Because it's the perception, it's literally the perception of something else. It is literally mind dependent, in the sense that if something were to fall and no one were there, a sound was not made. Sure, the emittance of some sort of wave was there, but the actual sound, like what we really call sound, like that wasn't there. And then when you look at color, different animals can see color to different degrees. They have different palette of sorts. Like there's more breadth to some species palettes than others and stuff, right? So that's like the sort of modern scientific evidence to adduce the whole claim that reality is perceptual, and that it would be very difficult to discern between an illusion, hallucination, reality, and that reality itself, like, objects do not present themselves as is. Not everything can be measured. And this makes sense even when we look at sort of modern science when it comes to measuring things like that are super multifaceted, like intelligence or creativity or something. And even with some physical objects, it's a little difficult to measure. Like especially when you get down to that quantum mechanics level and stuff, and that's where things get super complicated. And also another reason why idealism simply just like makes more sense and seems to have a little more credence, in my opinion, is just because of the fact that it actually aligns more with the common human experience, in the sense that, like, specifically the intensity to which you experience things and stuff. Sure, it can be explained at like a neuropsychological level or something, but once you go like into like what, like there's so many unknowns within that it's like empirical observation only goes so far. And also when you try to actually like dialectically, like scribe everything down, like do the freaking weird logic math thing, like in metaphysics, it just does not, it looks absolutely terrible when you're looking at a realist do all that and stuff. It goes in loops and there's still unanswered questions, and so idealism just makes more sense. It aligns with things, it's more straightforward, and we even have empirical evidence to sort of, adduce those claims. So it's kind of crazy, the fact that we're able to use the realists' bread and butter to prove our own sort of argument here to an extent. But that's not to say that you should completely dismiss everything outside of idealism. It's simply that I personally believe idealism, it's kind of the right sort of interpretation. Now that doesn't necessarily mean I completely cleave to that or something, or that empiricism is like a terrible thing. Simply that, I think idealism, we're on to something here. We're a little bit ahead of the game when it comes to ascertaining what reality is. All right, so to finish off, we'll jump back to the beginning and kind of say that reality is confusing. Yeah, definitely is. And, there's a big conundrum, a fiery debate going on when it comes to what reality is, especially when it comes to our mind in the material world. And I personally hold the idea that, reality is mind dependent. But of course, because, reality is nuanced, reality is reality, there could be some sort of like cumulative paradoxical thing where it's like in some cases, maybe it's not. Maybe you can only use empirical reasoning, and in another like spaces and such, you have to like oscillate between two different juxtaposing methodologies that, sort of derive from either the idea that reality is mind dependent or the idea that reality is mind independent, right? It could be absolutely crazy like that, which is why you don't want to become like super insular and intransigent in thought, right? You want to be open. So yeah. And it's important to talk about things like this, even if you never like, sort of pick a side, because this is what influences life. This is what influences measurement and methodology and things like that, right? And it's just sort of how we think and interact and stuff. So enjoy your day and do not stay up until 4 a.m.